Hi everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery today and we're visiting my finishing bins. These are bins that I store material in which I consider to be more or less finished compost. It's not perfect, it's definitely got some little bits and stuff. 40 days ago I decided that it was time to harvest some bins and I ended up with 3 of these finishing bins. So this is the smallest of the 3 and I've got 2 others that are in regular sized trays. And I've been trying to encourage any sort of straggler worms that might have made their way into here, as well as any newly hatched worms that might have recently emerged from cocoons. I've been trying to coerce them into these things that I refer to as bait boxes. So these bait boxes are just cartons, the bottom of a milk carton, and I've been putting various types of baits into these boxes in the hopes that the worms, newly hatched worms and straggler worms, would eventually make their way out of the material so that I could really consider this as finished compost and that I'd have the chance to recover the worms and put them back into service in my other bins. I've decided it's time to eliminate these boxes because I don't think that the boxes are working so well. The reason being that I went into these bins the other day and I kind of turned the material all over to inspect how things are going, and I found numerous worms hiding out down low, and I figured I've got to try to do something a little bit more effective to try to get the worms out of the material so that I can really consider this material as done. And now that these are sitting this way for 40 days now, I think there's still a little bit of an opportunity to take one more shot at another approach. So these boxes are coming out, and in their place I'm going to be taking some newspaper and I'm going to wrap some of these chunks of cantaloupe into those pieces of paper and put that wrapped little package down into where the bait box was. So for that I've got some old newspaper here ready to go, and then we'll take a look at what's in these momentarily, but I wanted to get these things reloaded back up on the shelf, and then we can examine how many worms we were able to manage to bait out this go around. The other thing I did a few days ago was I did jostle the material in each of these bins around, which did take some of the more damp material up from the bottom up to the top of the surface, and it also moved some of the more dry material down to the bottom. And in doing so, I did notice that a lot of the worms had made their way down to the bottom where it was more damp. And in this bin especially, the material is quite dry and crumbly. So in a way, I don't really blame the little guys looking for a little bit of relief if this material might be a little bit too dry for them. So hopefully a nice package of damp cantaloupe rinds and the moisture that they bring with them will be enough to lure the worms out of the material. So you know, just poking around here, I was able to see down low a number of worms hanging out. So I think the other benefit to doing this is to sort of get the worms back out into the material, just throughout the material a little bit, get them moving around again, away from the bottom, and then maybe they'll be more inclined to work their way over to the new bait bombs, if you want to call them that, or whatever, the new baits that I'm setting up with newspaper and cantaloupe. So I've got a piece of old newspaper here on the ready. It's full of all kinds of little holes anyway, so that's almost perfect, because that'll give them easy access to the material. And then the paper should soak pretty much through once the cantaloupe begins to melt, because it is frozen. So I'm not going to do anything too fancy. I just want it to sort of be somewhat wrapped up, but not overly snug, because I want the worms to be able to make their way in there as well. So we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully this is going to work a little bit better than the bait bombs did. So let's just cover up here and do the same on the other boxes. Okay, now here we are with bin number 2. The condition in these bins is a little bit better, not as dry. These were better covered than the small container. So I'm going to set these bait boxes aside and take another look through this material as well. Now the one thing that I've noticed in these as well is that I've constantly got little sprouts popping up. It's because there's a ton of little pumpkin seeds and cantaloupe seeds, and they're everywhere. And I actually went through this bin a couple days ago to try to pick off every pumpkin seed, every cantaloupe seed I could find. And then I went ahead and then I turned the material around to check out how things are doing, and I just found so many more after that. I got a little bit dismayed and gave up, but you can see everywhere I look there's pumpkin seeds. And to my surprise, well, maybe it shouldn't be that much of a surprise, but now I know why. When I used my vermicompost out in the garden, I was finding that tons and tons of tiny leaves of tiny sprouts are popping up around my plants that I use the vermicompost to plant with. And now I have to assume that it's either pumpkins or cantaloupes that are growing out in my garden alongside my peppers and tomatoes. There again, not a big problem, but sort of an unexpected little twist, which I'd really prefer if, hadn't happened. So I've been a lot more careful recently to make sure I don't include seeds in my vermicompost, or at least in my feedings. Just like you saw here, I was very careful to make sure that the seeds are separate from the cantaloupe rinds so as not to continue going down that same road again. But this is what it is, and I just have to live with it, so it's not a big deal. I'll just make do. So here too, this bin, you can see worms all over the place, right? And here too, you can see that the material is super fine, beautiful compost. But almost anywhere you look, you're going to find yourself a pumpkin seed. So I just really need to, give up on trying to pick them all out every time, because a person can go crazy. And I just need to accept the fact that, if I'm going to use this material in the future, I should expect sprouts to be popping out of the out of whatever it is that I've planted. So, but here too, you can see worms hanging out throughout the compost. There again, probably looking for moisture. So my hope is that setting up one of these little bait bombs is going to inspire them to come looking for that and congregating by it, so that I can take one last ditch effort at excluding the worms from the compost before I put the compost into storage. Let's create a little hole for the next bait bomb for this one. Let's see if we can get these little guys out of the material. Okay, now we're at the third of three. And this material just doesn't seem to have the same super fine consistency as the last bin that we just looked at. That last bin that we just looked at was just absolutely beautiful material. This stuff, I don't know if it's maybe because it's a little bit more damp or a little bit more sort of clumpy for whatever reason. Just doesn't seem to have that really super fine appearance to it. Or maybe it's just, I don't know, I'm not sure, I can't really explain it. The one thing I did notice that's a little bit different about this one, that it just doesn't seem to have as many worms in it. But it's definitely a lesson learned, to not include seeds in the feedings, because I guess if you think about it, a seed at some point, once it gets the right conditions, is going to sprout and grow. So it's, I guess even though it's just sitting there, it's still considered maybe by the worms as a living piece of organic matter. So maybe that's the reason the worms don't really go after seeds, and they won't get broken down. They'll just sit in the material until they get a chance to sprout. Let's set up the third little bait bomb, or whatever you want to call them. Call them in and get that in here, and get these trays back on the shelf. I guess my original intention was to allow just enough time for any cocoons that would have slid into these trays to hatch, and I think that's usually somewhere in the 3 to 4 week range, but well, 3 to 4 weeks has come and gone. So I'm definitely beyond that point in time. But since my garden's planted already at this stage and I don't really have an urgent need for the compost, I figured I can just sort of use this as a test bed to see how these bait boxes work, and I've pretty much determined that I don't like how they work so much. So if I'm still going to try to convince the worms to make their way out of the material so I can scoop them out and keep them as part of my colony, then some other method has to be employed. And maybe baiting them this way is not even the best approach. Maybe there's other better approaches out there. I've tried different things. I've tried the vertical migration, I've tried horizontal migration, so I'm just kind of an experimenter. I like to try different approaches to things and see how things work, or even see how they fail and learn from the experience. It's just interesting, I guess. I'm going to get these back on the shelf, and we'll be right back to empty out those boxes and see what we ended up with in terms of retrieving worms out of the bins. Alright, so my finishing trays are all back up on the shelf, so now they're back in service and continuing with the new attempt at baiting worms out. And what I've got here now in front of us is one of the newest bins that I have. I've got two fairly new bins. These are the same age. These are 40 days, yeah. This bin and the other bin that sits next to it up on the shelf, they're both 40 days because they were launched with the worms that were pulled out when I harvested. Here too, you can see sprouts, pumpkin, looks like pumpkin again. And what can I do? It's just it's a lesson learned, right? If you're gonna be sloppy about putting seeds into your worm food, then expect sprouts. All right, this material is really nice and damp. It's been about 6 days since I last fed, so this bin's probably due for another feeding, maybe tomorrow. And this will be a good chance just to see how they're coming along. So they'll just get a little bit of a preemptive snack with whatever comes out of those bait boxes that's not yet been broken down, as well as a little boost to the population with whatever worms successfully made their way into those bait boxes. But here we've got all kinds of, yeah, this is the bin that's chock full of mango seeds, a whole bunch of them. Here's an ear of corn with a whole slew of worms hanging out right beneath it. So this bin is chock full of large, hard materials, as well as this is the bin that has the cork in it. This is a cork. So this is the bin that's going to get the new members from the bait boxes. The bait boxes are right over here. So we're not going to be keeping these bait boxes afterwards. They're just going to go in the trash at this point. So we're just going to open up each one and try to get a sense of how well we did in our effort to bait worms out of the finished compost. This is just interesting how it's so long. Chopping off the roots. I guess we're going to get ourselves a nice little injection of bedding here. This is the banana peel that I had put in here most recently to try to bait worms with. And you know, I got to tell you, I don't really see many worms, if any. None. There's one. How do you like that? Okay, there I see another one. Looks like he might have slithered out of the material that we just dropped in here. And here's the banana peel there. You could see a small worm, a fairly juvenile worm, so that must have been one of the ones that was born in the bin. So that's kind of what we were after, except the results are a little bit lackluster. That's fine, not a big deal. Alright, so here's the smaller one out of the small finishing tub. Here too we've got ourselves a sprout growing. I'll always try to crush these sprouts, turn them into worm food when I have the chance. I don't need a little garden developing down here in my wormery. Now, I did put banana peel into all 3 of these boxes. I can still see the banana peel here. You can see I also loaded a little bit of grit in here along with the banana peel. However, I don't see even one worm hanging out here. And there again, I believe it's because the material in that bin is so dry that the worms are just diving, looking for moister soil to burrow down into, and they probably couldn't care about the smell of banana up in the bait box. So, oh well, definitely a failed attempt on that one. And this is the last of the 3. Let's see how this one's coming along. This might be the one that was in the bin that was very, very heavily populated with a lot of worms. So let's see what we are left with here. I guess in this case, I can't say I feel any sign of the banana peel, which is interesting. Oh, maybe this is that. A little tiny bit left of it. But there's also no worms. So maybe they came in, they may have just eaten the banana peel and left. I guess because the bait box wasn't a very interesting or social place to hang out. So okay, here's a couple, 1 or 2 hanging out within the leaves. We've now successfully decommissioned the bait boxes, and I'm going to kind of treat that as a failed test. But the attempt to bait worms out of my bins or out of my tubs, my finishing tubs, continues. So we'll check in on it again at some point in the future. Maybe we won't wait 14 or 15 days again like we did this time. Maybe we'll check in on them sooner to see if that cantaloupe is luring the worms out of the finished compost, and if it is, then good. Then that's good news. That's kind of what we're after. That's pretty much it for today, I guess. Got a little bit more cleaning up to do around here before I can call it a day, but as far as you guys are concerned, I'm going to say goodbye. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that, and consider subscribing to the channel as a regular viewer. Love to have you. Love to hear what you got to say. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.